This episode is sponsored by Day by Day Book, a guided journal that helps you navigate the ups and downs of change while creating a life you love. For more information on the classic, recovery, or teen day book, go to livedaybyday.com.
My son's father, he's not my demon, if that makes sense. For me, my demon is the system. Because here is a person who is extremely affected when it comes to just psychopathy. And he showed himself numerous times and the authorities did nothing. And our system just fell down so many times. So for me, my demon is our justice system, or our lack of justice, and our family court system. And those are the things that when I think of the justice that I'm chasing the moment that the same scenario could present itself and it would produce a different result because we fixed the system.
Welcome to Journeys Through Change, a podcast that inspires women to let go of the fear and say yes to possibility. I'm your host, Noelle Van, an author, creator, and empowerment coach who spent years in corporate America helping innovators and leaders ride the waves of change with ease and grace. I now work with women to step into change and unleash the power they have to create a life they love. Whether you're contemplating a change in your career, relationship, health, lifestyle, or anything in between, nothing's off the table. I'll be offering up simple insights to help you manage the ups and downs of change and sharing interviews with successful women who took a leap of faith to create the life they knew they were meant to live. Sharing their wisdom, advice, and all the juicy lessons they learned along the way. So get cozy in your favorite comfy chair and let's get started. When an unthinkable tragedy happens, we wonder how the human psyche can process such trauma and regain the strength to carry on. In 2012, Hera McLeod's 15-month-old son, Prince, was murdered by drowning at the hands of his father during an unsupervised visit. His father had a history of domestic violence and was under suspicion in the cases of 2 previous homicides that came to light during the course of their custody battle. Hera's fear for Prince's safety only strengthened her resolve to fight against the unsupervised visits that her partner had eventually been granted. Hera is a survivor of domestic violence, and her former partner is now in a Virginia prison serving a life without parole sentence for capital murder. In the decades since this unimaginable tragedy, she has devoted a large part of her life advocating for systemic change and increasing awareness on the issues of domestic violence, child abuse, child safety, and family court reform. She has testified before the United States Congress and the Maryland State Legislature, which has led to reformative legislation in the areas of family court and child protection. Her memoir, Defying Silence, a memoir of a mother's loss and courage in the face of injustice, tells a chilling story of domestic violence and the deep fractures in the American justice system that leave women and children vulnerable. Hera has chosen not to let her tragedy define her and sees herself as a survivor, not a victim. She finds healing in advocating for others who continue to be challenged by a system she is committed to change. Now a devoted mom to 2 amazing daughters, Estella and Isabel, and her angel baby Prince, who she continues to mother through the important work she is doing to carry on his sweet, loving spirit and legacy. So Hera, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Usually I have people kind of start their story just where they want us to start. And I was hoping that you could give us just some context of your background, and then we can go into everything else.
I'm from Washington, D.C. I spent some time in New England, though, so I don't know. I guess I'm Washington, D.C. native, but with short spurts in Rhode Island.
Oh, nice. So you grew up in D.C. I know that there's so many things that have gone on just in terms of you were on a show with your dad and you did a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
But give us an idea of, this was in your early 20s that you were on Amazing Race, right?
Yeah. So after I graduated from college, I went to George Washington University. I did 2 years in Teach for America in Los Angeles, California, and just living the LA life for a little bit. And I'm a huge reality TV fan, though I hadn't watched The Amazing Race before I was actually on it, which is a whole thing. But I really enjoy watching Survivor. I don't know, it's just interesting social dynamics.
Yes.
And watching a train wreck at the same time. That makes it so interesting.
Right.
And so when I was in LA, I was like, I'm just going to apply for Survivor and see how it goes. And so I did, and I didn't hear anything for a while, but I was just out at brunch one day with a friend, and this random woman comes up to me and she goes, Hera. And I was like, do I know you? And she was like, oh my gosh, I watched your video. Like, I'm a producer from Survivor. And I was like, oh, interesting. And so she was like, you're going to get a call from me soon. So I went through like the process of Survivor, didn't make the cut for Survivor, but they called and they were like, hey, we really want you on this show called The Amazing Race. Have you ever heard of it? And I'd heard of it, but I was like, I don't watch it. And so they sent me a video, like a couple of episodes. And I was like, oh, you guys are going to like pay me to travel? Like, this is fun. And so they were looking for another like male female team. And I had just like broken things off with a romantic partner. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going on the race with him. He's not a good candidate. And so they were like, well, what about like your dad or your brother? And my brother was pursuing his PhD at the time. And so he like couldn't go. And I was like, I haven't spoken to my dad in 6 months because we were in like this big fight at the time. And they were like, oh, that's perfect. And I was like, that's not perfect. I was like, if you can convince him to go, then like, I'll give it a shot. And so when they called and asked him, he immediately was like, sure. Cause he was thinking like, this will be a great opportunity for me to get my kid to talk to me again. Right.
Oh my God.
I still kind of just like didn't think it was a thing. And they flew my dad out to LA. And then I think like a couple of weeks later, I got a call from a producer and like, you guys are going to be on the show. And I was like, oh, it's amazing.
Being amazing as it is, right? I mean, that's a physical challenge. So did you think at all about like, oh my gosh, we're going to be like running around the world doing a whole bunch of different crazy things?
I was very fit. So like, I wasn't worried about myself. I was a little worried about my dad because he actually turned 50 on the race, which like isn't old.
Wow.
And now that I'm like, in my 40s, I'm like, that's not old at all. But at the time I was like, oh my gosh, he's like not young.
Right.
He also wasn't in the best shape. Like he's actually at almost 70. He's in better physical shape than he was when we ran the race, which is awesome. I'm super proud of him. But like he was also sort of in denial at 50 that he was like not in the greatest shape. And so I was like, we're running anywhere.
Can you decide that?
It's not like people think race and they think that you're like running. Like
right. But you're going from
not,
place to place, you're solving clues, and then you're going into different.
Like it's more about like how quickly you can like flag a cab down. Like
right.
Like we wouldn't have been eliminated the day that we were eliminated had we actually like had someone not stolen our cab and we had to walk like several miles to get another one. Like,
yeah. Okay. So it's more like transportation and logistics and
it's transportation,
getting along and
logistics, like luck sometimes, like being in the right place at the right time, like making, your plane not being delayed. Like there's some things that you just like have no control over.
Right. Right.
And my dad and I knew coming in, like, we're not running anywhere because like, we're not going to win a foot race. Like this is going to be all about like who can outsmart the next person. No shade to any of the fellow racers, but I think my dad and I were probably like the smartest on the show.
But I love that you guys got together that way. And it sounds like, I mean, I don't know your dad and I don't know you very well, but I think of it like as you guys seem to have obviously a stronger bond from that. That's like a pretty ballsy thing to do. Like, it's just a cool thing to do.
I'm thankful he decided to do it. I think it gave me, it gave me a different perspective about him. And I think it gave him a different perspective about me. And I think, I think we left the show kind of, proud of who we represented on television, despite all the chaos they put you through.
So, okay, so you're in your early 20s at this point. Take us further through.
Yeah, so I finished up my Teach for America time and moved back to Washington, D.C. To work with government. Was working for the Central Intelligence Agency for a few years. Got to serve overseas with them. At that point, I was in my late 20s. And I don't know why I sort of felt like I was feeling the hard shade from society of like my singleness, which now at like 43 and still single and, happily so, I get like very upset at myself for being so pressed in my late 20s. But I was pressed. I wanted to settle down. And I think it could possibly because, working with foreign service officers and a small embassy overseas where everyone is married, it starts to make you feel like there's something wrong with you if you're not. And people would actually say, they're like, what's wrong with you? You're 28 and like, you're still single with no kids. And if it were me now, I would have left. So yeah, I came back, got out of government service and was just like hell bent on settling down. I was like, I want to have kids, so I'm going to have to go find myself a husband. And I think the pressure of dating with that type of expectation was really dangerous. And at the time, internet dating was just starting to take off. I firmly believe that app dating and internet dating has ruined dating because I think it has made people less willing to stand on a limb and like ask people out, just out in the world. And the danger, it's like people are like, oh, but it gives you access to people that you wouldn't normally. And I'm like, yeah, but sometimes that can be a bad thing because I think people can kind of invent themselves. And you see it all the time with like catfishers, right? And essentially, I mean, my ex, the guy that I met on Match.com, like he was not who he presented. And he was allowed to get away with it because we didn't have people in common. And I had no background on what he said that he did. Everyone always says, like, oh, make sure you meet the family and friends. Like, I met people who claimed to be his family and friends who were not his family and friends. They were like, I guess, actors. And it's astonishing to this day that like these people are still walking around like with no culpability that they lied to my face saying that they were like cousins, aunts, and uncles, and they're not related because I've met his real family now. And they're like, no, he's crazy. And those people are not related to us. People make a lot of assumptions about what abusers look like when you first meet them. They are not going to punch you in the face and ask you on a date. That's not how it goes. He was very charming. He was very interesting, fantastic storyteller. And he was single parenting his son, who was about 10 or 11 when we met. So yeah, he seemed like a normal guy. He had money. So, I didn't question when he said he worked. I assumed he did.
Right, right.
He owned his own home. He had a car. He obviously he was spending money on a regular basis. So everything seemed fine until it wasn't fine. And probably for me, the turning point was when I got pregnant. And in hindsight, apologies to anyone who has feelings about abortion, I don't know why I did not consider that path. I guess I should say I don't know why I didn't consider that path harder. I think for me at the time, I was like, I'm 28, I'm responsible, I make a living, like I should have this baby. And I didn't consider the fact that I didn't know this person very well.
How far along were you in the relationship before you got pregnant?
I think it was about 8 months, so it wasn't long enough to really know someone. I thought I felt comfortable enough with him that I thought it would be okay. And at that point, we were already talking about marriage. And so I was like, okay, well, if we're already going to get married, then, this is fine, which is flawed logic, right?
Well, I mean, you could say all of that, but when you think about living that and in the moment, we're all careful people. It's not like you were just like, oh, whatever. You had a certain sense about things, like you said, and you were logically thinking through things. In your mind, it was logical at the time, right?
Yeah, it was logical at the time. And I think I had heard a lot of stories about people like getting engaged and married in roughly a year. And it's like, no big deal, right? And it ends up being fine. I think there's risk in a lot of stuff, right? Like I know people who have dated someone for years and then they got married and the person isn't fine. So I don't know that it is a timing thing, but I do think that for me at least, the pregnancy did change a lot. And I think there was likely a feeling on his end. And, again, I'm trying to like maybe diagnose crazy here, but, I think there was a feeling on his end that he had me. Like he had this attachment to me. And even if I wanted to leave, like I was not going to really ever be able to get away from him.
Mm-hmm.
It maybe expedited some of the mask coming down because that's really when things started changing a lot.
And when you say changing a lot, was there obvious abuse happening at that point, or was it very gradual?
Most of the abuse was more of like the coercive control variety. But I think the first time he ever got like physically violent was when I was 6 months pregnant. I was really sick. I had food poisoning. And he like threw a pot at my head and was like, just don't throw up on the floor. I remember being so upset trying to call him on it. And the response, like the gaslighting that I got and the fear that I had with just like how he responded when I pushed back. And I think from there it just got progressively worse. But I mean, it was a lot of like the fear of him doing something. I always tell people he had this gun that he would just like put on the mantle, and he would like lob threats when he was in like a weird mood. It was like he would just pop off on me for reasons that I was like, what did I step into unknowingly? But believing, like truly believing that you can't leave a house without someone's permission unless it's in a body bag, like will make you not leave.
Right.
I think the hard thing is like when people think of abuse, they're like, oh, why don't I see bruises? Like I was going to work at this time. Like I was a functional person. And the people around me probably had no idea that I was coming home to a complete nightmare.
And I can imagine too, from a psychological perspective, like somebody has a weapon that changes the game pretty fast.
Yeah. And like they have a weapon. And then if you add the layer of like, there is another child in the house that you've grown attached to that you cannot take with you, and they're abusing that kid, and you know that if you leave, there's no one there for them.
Oh, this is his son?
His son, yeah. And so I just felt trapped. Like I felt trapped and I didn't know how to leave. Like there was one moment when I did leave for like, I don't know, it was like 2 days. And I remember the whole time I was gone, I was like, how am I able to stay gone? I just knew he wasn't going to stop. I knew he was going to come after us. Yeah, I went back.
But so what was the turning point? Like, how did you get the strength?
I would say in the months leading up to my son's birth, I knew it wasn't going to be sustainable. Like it just kept getting worse. And was it was like a darkness came over him. Like he was not sleeping. He was like not even showering. Like it was just like he just presented it as a completely different person. And I didn't know what to do. And I was like, but this feels unsustainable because even me trying to pressure him to like get up and like adult is causing him to rage on me. And at the time, I just felt like I was torn between like, is this person depressed? Like, am I like I don't know what I'm dealing with here. I didn't know what I was looking at. I was like, I can't leave somebody who's just like having some kind of mental issue, but also the physical safety element, right? And it wasn't until 2 weeks after my son was born, he convinced me to let him take my 19-year-old sister out for like some concert he wanted to go to. And he then proceeded to attack her. I didn't know until I came back to the house with the boys and my parents came to get me and they were like, you got to get out. Like, we're taking you out. You cannot stay here.
Because they heard from your sister that this had happened,
My
right?
sister told them, even though she was terrified of him because, of course he did the same thing to her by like showing her his weapon and saying that he would hurt her or me. I think he miscalculated that I think he thought that I would believe him. And I was like, there was no moment where I was like, she's lying and he's not. Like, I'm like, no. Like, but I did feel like in that moment that like somebody had dumped ice on my head. I was like, holy cow, like, who is this person that I've been with? And when I went to leave, he held the gun to me and was like, you're not leaving. And my dad was like, no, son, we're leaving. We'll work this out later. I remember him saying to me, if you leave, I'm going to just kill you. Like I killed Sean. And I'll get Prince anyway.
And Sean is
his older son's mom.
Okay. And this is the first you had heard of this, I'm assuming?
Well, I knew she was dead, but he told me that she had just been in an accident. Like I didn't know that she had been shot and killed. And I certainly didn't think it was him. I think he was at all wrapped up in it. And so when I left, I panicked and was like, oh my gosh, I called a private investigator and was like, who is this person? I filed for custody. This is the Crib Notes version. You can read the full version in Flying Silence, my memoir. But yeah, I called a private investigator and I'm thinking with the private investigator, I'm just going to learn like tidbits of things. I had no idea what I was going to find out. This man, he was a suspect in 2 previous murders. His older son's mom, who was killed on the eve of their custody hearing. And then his own mom, who was found with the plastic bags just lying on her head in his house with a suicide note that police later told me was not in her handwriting. And they ruled it a suicide anyway, which I have no idea to this day, like what's going on with that police department. I have theories, but I'll keep them to myself. I could not believe it. The private investigator also found several people who were willing to testify in my custody case about him, including his older son's grandma and one of his ex-girlfriends. He'd also assaulted several of his former business partners, and all kinds of stuff was coming out. But I figured at first, I was like, oh, this is great. At least there's people who are going to come into court to be like, hey, this man is not safe. I also found a police officer who was willing to come into court to tell the judge he is the sole suspect in this cold case for this woman, who, by the way, he continuously tried to access her life insurance policies for himself. But after all of these people testified, the judge ordered a psychological assessment, allowed him to choose his own person. He chose somebody who was not licensed to actually test an adult and was not licensed to test anyone outside of a school setting. So this is somebody who diagnoses with ADHD and things like that, right?
Yeah.
She said that he had mild depression. That is when the judge lifted the supervised visitation. And on the fourth unsupervised visit, he killed him. And that is when I learned that about 2 months after we left, before I had heard from him at all, he took out over $500,000 in life insurance policies on Prince. And he hoped that he would be able to get away with it for a third time. And he was going to live off of life insurance benefits.
Oh my God. How do you even crawl out of that? How did you put one foot in front of the other after that?
I wasn't doing well at first.
Yeah.
I tell people, I'm like, the me you see now is not the version of me that was then. But I didn't feel like there was any other choice. I knew that I didn't want him to take my joy away from me forever, right? I was like, this person does not get to be the person that destroys my life. I also knew that my son deserved more. And, I tell people frequently, my son's father, he's not my demon, if that makes sense. For me, my demon is the system. Because here is a person who is extremely affected when it comes to just psychopathy. And he showed himself numerous times, and the authorities did nothing. And our system just fell down so many times. So for me, my demon is our justice system, or our lack of justice, and our family court system. And those are the things that when I think of the justice that I'm chasing the moment that the same scenario could present itself and it would produce a different result because we fixed the system. That's what gets me out of bed. That and my two little girls.
I love that. How old are your two little girls right now?
So one of them's 5 and one of them's 10.
And I did see, which did not have in the intro, but that you have a podcast with one of your daughters. And we'll talk about that in a bit because I think that's awesome. As we all know, change is inevitable. Sometimes it comes out of nowhere, leaving us to pick up the pieces and navigate our way through the unknown. Other times it's a decision we've made to step into a bigger version of ourselves or find more joy or fulfillment in our lives. Day by Day book was designed to help you face the discomfort of those shifts in life that are pushing you to that next level of growth and learning. It's a guided journal with a simple tracking system to manage your daily well-being during challenging times, setting you up for success no matter what life throws your way. Join our community of over 15,000 changemakers and get started on your daybook journey today. The time is now to step into change to create a life you love. To get your Day by Day book, go to livedaybyday.com. I love the how you describe this shift too, because it's almost that pivotal, I don't know if it's a moment, a time, a space of time where you have to kind of make that decision. Like you said, am I going to move forward or not? You have to kind of in your soul, in your gut, recognize that there's something that needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fact that the system being as it was is something that now you take that time to advocate for and to make sure that you're helping to change that. That's huge. That's a lot on your shoulders too, I can imagine. But have you felt that, I think you had mentioned earlier when we talked about, there needs to be almost a revolution or there needs to be some sort of a complete shift. So tell us more about that. What are you seeing in the system now and kind of how far do we have left to go in your mind?
Oh man, there's so many things. Part of what I talk about in my book is that I say I wrote it for 2 reasons. One, I wanted to write the book that I needed when I was in it. And two, I wanted to write the book that would give policymakers and advocates a map of all the things that could be possibly changed, because there were so many things that went wrong in my case. But I think that one of the deepest concerns that I have is that in all facets of our criminal and civil justice system, I see patterns where kids are treated like not people. And if you think about our Constitution, like, it doesn't mention children. And I think that one of the things in our country is that there's an assumption that the parents will pass on their civil rights. Their children are an extension of them. And like, in a good case, that happens. But in reality, like with a parent who's ill, who's not okay, that doesn't happen. And our system doesn't recognize children independently of their parents. And so it almost is set up to allow parents to do with their kids whatever they want. And I want us to get to a point where we recognize them as people, like with their own agency and their own rights that are independent of their parents' rights. If we can think of it in that way, I think a lot would change. But the problem we have right now is that kids can't vote. They don't have money. America turns on money and power. And this is a population that does not have money or power. And I think that it is incumbent on us to look at them as the most vulnerable part of our population, to be like, well, we know that they don't have this, and therefore it is our responsibility to make sure that they're protected. So when you go into family court, like, I don't care if dad and mom are money bags. The person we should be focusing on is what is going to be the best for this kid, and make sure that they can have access to their parents safely and grow up to be okay.
I'm curious, when you went through the trial and this was looked at in its entirety, was there a recognition from the courts? Was there any message back to you of, wow, we really fell down in this?
No. And it's interesting because right afterwards, I filed a complaint against the judge, and which is all you can do. You can't sue them because they have immunity, which is part of the reason they act foolish all the time. But I filed a complaint. The basis of my complaint was that the day that he sentenced my son to death, essentially, he turned to me and he said, your son would have to come back to me with cigarette burns on his back to be qualified for a child in need of action case. And child in need of action is basically like for us to consider him a potential victim of abuse. You know, he also said on the stand, he's like, I hate family court because of cases like this. And if I didn't have to be here, I wouldn't be here. And so I complained because I was like, this man held my son's life in his hands. So I did that. And I also sent him a letter that I published all over the place. And it was basically like, my kid came back to me in a body bag. What do I do now? I wish he had had cigarette burns because you survive that. But yeah, there was no retrospective done. They didn't owe any explanation to the public. Never have I ever received an apology. Never have I ever received an acknowledgement from the judge at all in any capacity. He did resign shortly after my son died. Mind you, he went through his other rotations before he resigned. So he only resigned when he was about to go back into family court, citing that he had been personally and professionally impacted by my son's death. And I'm like, okay, well.
Yeah. All right.
I have asked him to help advocate for the protection of children. I think if he did that, I would have a lot of respect, because I think in many ways he was also somewhat of a victim of the system and perhaps his own ignorance. He refuses because he doesn't have a big enough spine to be able to deal with it or publicly acknowledge his mistakes.
Yeah, accountability can be a tough pill to swallow for some people.
But it's not just him, right? Like, I mean, there's people all over. Like, we had a supervised visitation provider that was horrid.
But it's a systemic thing, right? It's kind of a systemic thing. So
yes,
one could argue, well, I was part of a corrupt system, so I was kind of a victim myself. But
yeah,
that's kind of a lame, it's like a lame way of looking at it.
Right. And I think people make choices, and I think that it would have been honorable had any of those people involved in the situation taken an ounce of accountability and said, okay, I am now going to try to change this because this is wrong. But they don't. They just, like I was just telling someone the other day, like they scurry like rats on a New York subway station. They were never a part of it at all.
Well, okay, so you have been doing this and working within the system. It's the Maryland legislative. That's kind of what you've been part of more recently, right?
I would say within the system because I am not a legislator.
Okay,
However, yes. I have been advocating mostly for policy changes in the state of Maryland. I do a lot of writing to advocate for this across the nation because Maryland is not, a special snowflake in this situation. I mean, we hear about children being murdered all over the United States and also probably globally. I'm less familiar with like other laws in other countries, but I mean, I think the United States is pretty much uniformly terrible when it comes to this. I would love to see some federal legislation. There has been some movement with like Caden's law was adopted into the violence against women legislation. But the problem with it, I mean, the problem with the federal government in general really is that there's money, but the states have to actually pass child protective laws to access the money. And none of them have been willing to do that yet. It's one of those things where it's like, it's lovely. I'm glad that they have this sentiment, but I think that we probably need something stronger when they pass like Brown versus Board of Education or any of those things. Like, yeah, there were states that were like, yeah, no, F you, we're still not going to integrate schools. And then they were like, okay, fine, we're not paving your roads. So, I think that really, if we care, if we decide to stop it, then there are things that the federal government can do. They're just going to have to get a little bit more ballsy and do them. I think a lot of people, and, I've told this to the Maryland legislators, it's like, you may think that you can close your ears because your child is not going to be in family court. But imagine a scenario in which there is a child out there who has just been terrorized for 16 years by an abusive parent, and they knock on your door and want to take your daughter to prom. Next thing you know, that's your problem, right? We don't live in an isolated society. Or this person becomes your manager one day and is a complete nightmare, because they were abused as a kid, or you start dating one of them. You marry and have kids with somebody who is not able to cope or adult because of their lived trauma and abuse. So we don't have the luxury of ignoring this and expecting it to go away because it's not going to.
All right. There's no escaping it. It is everywhere. So are you now, when we think about what's coming next for you, I know there's a bunch of things that you're doing. And first of all, let's talk about your novel, because I love that you're still writing. And your first book, obviously, very powerful. And I'm so happy to know that you got that out and into the world, just for so many reasons. But I think that now it sounds like you're moving into a different genre. How does that feel?
As I was writing my memoir, which, by the way, took me a decade to write because it was really difficult. And part of it is that I felt like I needed perspective, and I also needed to hold myself accountable. Like, I didn't want to write something that was like, oh, let me point fingers at all the people, right? I wanted to write authentically, even about myself. But during that process, I was like, when you're writing a nonfiction book and you're trying to be authentic, it's hard because you can't just make stuff up, right? Like you have to be very factual. And so I spent like hours pouring through like FOIA documents and pointing through like my custody case so that I could like be very factual and accurate as to what happened, at least for like the mechanics, right?
Yes.
But I was kind of craving like just still writing about something that was like shining a light on some of the systemic issues in our society, but in a way where I could just make stuff up. And so I started writing a fiction novel and just like pieces of scenes. And it's turned into like a romantic thriller novel. It's one of those things where like, yes, it's a romance technically, but it's also one of those things that I think will leave people feeling like, holy cow, like our government is really corrupt. The story is essentially two patriots who are working for the government, and that through the course of working, they start sort of realizing like, wait a second, like I am working for something that I did not sign up for. Like, this is not what I thought it was. And so I sort of use the US government as sort of like a vehicle, but it could be like any sort of agency or any sort of level of corruption. But they go through the process of like, in some ways getting justice, but like saving their nation. They're like, we still are patriots. This is not working. But it's been fun to write because I can just make stuff up, right? Like it's almost like, it's like, I think people will read it and they'll be like, oh my gosh, is this true or an indictment? No, it's just fiction, right? Could it happen? Absolutely. Right?
Right. Yeah.
I have like enough guilty knowledge having worked for the government to know that like, yeah, like it's totally believable, not true, right?
Right.
But
Right.
I do address things in there simply of like, some of the topics that I address are like what it's like to work as a woman in a male dominated industry, like being the only woman in the room and having to deal with like anything from like small microaggressions to like full on sexual assault in the workplace and like not being able to actually like feel like you have any recourse to do anything. And I think so many women face this, right? And so I'm like, I don't want to just write a fluffy romance novel. Like,
Right.
I want to write a novel where I'm obviously entertaining people while I'm doing it, but I want to write a novel that is going to also leave people sort of thinking about like these things in their everyday life, like how women have to navigate this world that is, essentially driven by like the misogynistic power struggle.
It's so interesting to me how you have all the different channels, right? That you have kind of branched out into. From a outsider looking in would say it's undeniably a very tragic thing. I feel like you've kind of moved into these different realms of like how to be able to heal yourself, but also you're giving back so much to bringing awareness to people. Now, I love this idea of the podcast with your daughter. And I just want to ask you more about that because I had ran across it and I thought, shoot, I can't believe I didn't put that in her intro. So what made you decide to do this podcast with her and what's it about?
So I had been doing a podcast called Mocha SMC with former business partner. And so I'm a single mom by choice. What that means essentially is after my son died, I still wanted to be a mom, but I didn't want to co-parent. I was like, and I also didn't want to put pressure on a relationship, like the pressure of my biological clock and still wanting to be a mom. So I had my children via sperm donor. And so I'm a single mom by choice. And so the first podcast was essentially talking about what it was like to be a single mom by choice. So we would talk about anything from like sperm choice to like, just like navigating the world as a single mom. So when that ended, I didn't really know if I was going to do something else. But my daughter actually approached me and was like, well, I want to be your co-host. Like, we should do a show.
Love that.
And I thought she was joking at first. I was like, I don't know about that. And I was like, well, what will we talk about? And she was like, well, I think we should talk about like what it's like to be a family that's just like a mom and kid family. And also like for her is like the celebration of different types of families. And so it's called Seeking Different. We talk about being a single mom by choice family, but then also we have tried to interview other different types of families. Like we've interviewed a family that went through divorce, a 2-mom family. We really want to interview a 2-dads family. So if you know any,
okay,
that's one of our next like hopes. Yeah. Just all sorts of different types of family. And like the whole idea is like seeking different, but really we're just trying to show that like there is no normal when it comes to family. We talk about travel a lot. We've been talking lately about, we're on a little bit of a hiatus right now, but when we come back, a lot about like just really tough conversations that you would have with your kid because about just like life, it could be anything from like puberty to like navigating the playground. We talked about consent on one of the episodes where we were like, what does that look like for a kid? Like, how do you sort of, anything from like, don't touch my hair to like, what does it mean when someone says they're being mean to you because they like you? Like, that's weird.
Right. Wait, now how old is your daughter?
She's 10 and we've been doing it since she was about 8 or 9. Yeah.
I did listen to one of the episodes and I'm like, she is like 10 going on 21, first of all. She is super smart, but I love it because it's such a good, first of all, it's great to see the interplay between the two of you, but also she's just like, I don't know, it's kind of like out of the mouths of babes, right?
Yeah.
Just the things that come out of her mouth. So I love that. And I love that you do it together and I'm sure she's having a blast.
I told her that because she keeps asking me, she's like, well, when are we going to come back with another season? It's been a crazy season because I've been doing a lot of like book stuff. So I've sort of like put a pause until we can have summertime to re-record. But I told her, I said, you produce the episodes and we will come out with more. She's going to. She has some thoughts. Like, I think one of the next ones is going to be like sleepovers equals social currency. Because like we've been talking about how like birthday parties become this like social currency as you get older.
Oh my God.
The dynamics of like whether you're invited to a party or not invited to a party. So
I love it. You probably have a great listenership too, because these topics are so good and they give both perspectives.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the mom's perspective and the kid's perspective, and she is just whip smart. I mean, like, I would listen to her, especially if I was 15 or so. I'd be like, she's got it.
We love having car conversations, which was also sort of the core of the podcast, where like it's great to have hard conversations with your kids in the car because they can't see your face. And I have a really hard time fixing my face. And I like doing it in the car because when I can't fix my face, they still keep talking and they don't think they have to like change what they're saying to manage my emotions. And so we're hopeful that people will listen to the show in the car so that it spurs like conversations with their kids.
I love that. That is a great idea. Okay, so when is the novel? We don't have a title for the novel yet. We're not going to disclose any title.
I do not have a disclosable title.
Okay.
The goal is to get it on submissions in the fall.
Okay.
So I did not traditionally publish my first book because I did not want to adhere to publisher, discomfort. Like a lot of people are uncomfortable when you start talking about the police and you start talking about our systems. And, I got to a point where I was like, I want this to be authentically what I want this to be. And I don't want to compromise. And if that means that I don't have, a big publisher pushing me forward, then I'm okay with that. Because I didn't write it to be a millionaire. Like nobody, it's like this, it's not why I wrote it. But the next one, some of my writer friends have been trying to push me to actually go through the traditional publishing. So I am going to put it on submission with agents probably late summer, early fall, and see how it goes. So it's still probably, if all goes well, it's still probably like a year away from actually being published. But I'm also not opposed to self-publishing again because I just love it. I don't know. I haven't had a problem with self-publishing. It's great. Like people are still buying the book.
Yes. Oh my God. You can go, there's so many different routes that you can go these days too. It's just really what your comfort level is. Hera, I thank you so much for being on and talking with us about I feel like we went down a lot of different roads here, but I just want to say that, first of all, I think the people that have you to advocate for them, which you've been doing every single day since this all happened, they should be very grateful. And I'm sure they are very grateful because you're such a bright light and you shine a lot on, I think, a situation that people are probably struggling with and having challenges with. And so for you to be there to advocate for them is huge.
I'm grateful to them too.
Yeah. And it's very healing, I'm sure, isn't it? It's a healing process.
I'm very grateful to those who are still in it and, putting one foot in front of the other. And I also know that even if they don't find their voice in this way, they'll pay it forward in some other way.
Yes,
so
for sure, which is exactly what you're doing. So thank you. Thank you again. And I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you.
That's it for now. Until next time. Thanks for listening to the Journeys Through Change podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or really wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us and leave a review if you've enjoyed this episode. And share it with a friend or on social media to spread the good word, so more women like you can find us and join in on the fun. For more information on the podcast or Day by Day book, go to livedaybyday.com.